My name is Tamika Felder. I am a 22-year cervical cancer survivor. I'm the founder of Survivor, and we're in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Summerville, South Carolina, just outside of Charleston, so the low country of South Carolina, and it is the birthplace of sweet tea. So if you like sweet tea, you can thank my hometown for that. But after college, I moved to Washington, D.C. to start my career as a broadcast journalist. And I love the Washington, D.C. area. I love South Carolina, but this has been home since I graduated from college, so 1997. I didn't know much about cervical cancer when I was diagnosed. Later on, I remembered vaguely that there was someone that I went to college with and they had cervical cancer. But prior to my own diagnosis, I wasn't very familiar with it, which is odd because if you ask any of my friends, I'm the one that's like, oh, you better watch out for this, you better know about this, you better be aware of this. I used to work for a health TV show, and so I was very well versed in health issues. The human papillomavirus, HPV, and cervical cancer wasn't one of the things that we ever talked about. I actually went back and looked at some old scripts, and I was like, maybe I just, there's so many topics, maybe it was one, but no, we didn't. I asked another producer, and what I learned throughout this journey is that it wasn't something that was very familiar to people. So when I was diagnosed in 2001 at 25, it seemingly came out of nowhere. And the interesting thing is, because it was 2001, this is where I really date myself, there wasn't social media, or social media was just for college students, people in the university. There wasn't really a lot of information. I went to my library, I looked at bookstores, and I looked and pulled out my encyclopedias and all this other stuff. We had AOL dial-up, and I'm trying to figure out, does anybody know anything about this? Because I know what cancer is like. My dad sadly died of colon cancer the day before my 17th birthday. I've had a lot of family members who have had cancer, unfortunately. So I've seen the toll that cancer takes on one. I know what someone with cancer looks like, and now so many years later, I know how foolish that sounds, because you can't look at someone and tell they had cancer, but that's what I thought. So when I was diagnosed, I thought all the doctors got it wrong. So I'm one of the people in the United States who, working as a television producer, sometimes I was a freelancer and I didn't have health insurance. And, being a young person in my 20s, I thought, I don't need it. I'll take the job even though it doesn't have health benefits, because if I get sick, I get sick, and I'll just go to the emergency room, or I'll do a home remedy or whatever. It wasn't like I was thinking about it. So when I had an issue, which had nothing to do with the cervical cancer, but it's what got me in the hospital, in front of a doctor. I had a boil under my arm, and it was very painful. And at the time, I had a manual 5-speed car. And so sitting in traffic, driving around the DC Beltway traffic, it was becoming painful. And I had done all the things. It was basically like a pimple gone wrong or whatever. And so I was just like, I need to get this taken care of. I was starting a new job that had health benefits. So it was like all the things were lining up. So I went in, and the doctor asked me a simple question. He was like, when was your last physical? When was your last pap test? And I was like, ooh, I think like 3, maybe 4 years ago. I think 3. And he said, well, you're a young woman and you need to make sure you stay on top of all of your health exams. And I was like, okay. And he gave me a referral, and I remember thinking, like, this is such a busy time. Like, it's springtime, and at this point in my career, I was working on a live news show, and I remember I had fought like I don't know what to get on the show. And when I first started, I was on the night show, right? And I mean, like, I would get off 2 o'clock in the morning, which was fine because I'm a night owl. But when I solidified this full-time position, I was on the morning show. So I had to be there like at 6 a.m., which was a struggle for me. But I was young, I was hungry, I was going to do it. And I remember thinking, I don't have time for this. Like, I don't have time to make this appointment. But for whatever reason, I did. And I went in for the appointment. And this doctor was like this Persian grandmother. She was just quite the character. And her rule was, I don't have your previous medical history, so I want you to come back in 2 weeks. I'm like, do you know what I had to do to find this time to come and see you? And you want me to come back in 2 weeks? I'm thinking, like, do what all the other doctors do. If there's a problem, call me. If it's all good, then I won't hear from you or whatever. And she was very like, no, you need to come back. And I was so annoyed by it. So fast forward 2.5 weeks later, I go back for the follow-up appointment, and everything is great. She said, no this, no that, and she touches me by the knee and she says, let's talk about your pap. And it literally was like the bottom just fell out, and my life forever changed on that day, April 12th, 2001. So what she initially told me was that I had cancer in situ and I needed to see a specialist because she was a primary care physician. So my cancer was initially found by my primary care physician who did my cervical cancer screening. So she was like, you need to see a specialist. And she said, we see this all the time. And it was the beginning of we see this all the time that would become the catalyst for me wanting to do something about this. So she immediately reached out to a specialist, and I went to see them. I think the next day. She was trying for me to go the same day, and it was the next day. And I have to tell you, like, I pretty much always have it together, but I was so just floored by this news. They had to reach out to my emergency contact. My cousin's wife came and picked me up, and it was just unbelievable news to me. Like, I just couldn't believe it. And so it was just the most gorgeous spring day. And here I was at 25 with, you have cervical cancer, and not knowing what to do with that information. So the next day came, and I kind of pulled myself together so that I could go see the specialist. And we're in the appointment, and yet again, my feet are in stirrups, and they're trying to reassure me that everything is going to be fine. We see this type of thing all the time. But the difference this time was I was looking at the nurse's face, and she was looking between my legs. The doctor was taking the biopsy, and everything on her face said that it wasn't going to be fine. And the truth is, I was 25 years old and I didn't want to die. I had so much to live for. I had so much that I wanted to do. You know, I think a lot of times when people think of someone who has faith, because I'm a Christian, that, you know, I was really raised to believe that whatever God's plan for you is going to be your plan. But I just couldn't fight this urge that I don't know what God's plan is, but God, I'm not ready to go. And so I was looking at this and I was thinking, like, no, I can't have cancer. And so they sent me to another doctor, and that's when I got to Johns Hopkins. They told me the same thing, that it looks like I have early stage cervical cancer, but in order to save my life, I would need a radical hysterectomy. And I thought, if it's early, why would I need a radical hysterectomy? And that means I'm never going to be a mom. Like, I was in no rush to be a mom. You know, if you ask my siblings, they would tell you when they heard the news that I was going to have our hysterectomy, they didn't think it was a big deal because I was so focused on my career. But the truth is I always wanted to be a mom. I just knew that I was going to be a mom. If I was going to be a mom, it was going to be later in life, and, you know, it wouldn't be whatever society thinks is a normal way, which the irony now of how I became a mom is like literally that's what happened. But I didn't want that to be taken away from me. And so when I got to Johns Hopkins, I had a great doctor, right? And I was like, I need a second opinion. And I got several second opinions. And I know the 25-year-old me was looking for the one doctor who would say, they all got it wrong. You don't need to get a hysterectomy. But I never found that. Every single doctor that I saw said that I needed a hysterectomy. And there was this one doctor, I remember I was so angry with her for so many years. She said my cervix looked like chewed up meat, and that the cancer had just basically taken over my entire cervix. And I remember thinking, okay, I've got to have this hysterectomy. So because I had so many second opinions, I literally pushed it off. Like I was like, I need more time. And I remember the hospital calling in and saying, no, we need to schedule this. And so I was diagnosed on April 12, 2001, and my radical hysterectomy happened on June 14, 2001. So there was a little bit of time, but it was mainly because I was like, nope. And maybe it was because I was in denial. Maybe it was I just didn't want to accept it. Maybe it was, I looked at myself every day in the mirror and I was like, I don't have cancer. Like, I don't look like someone who has cancer. Not that I want diabetes or anything like that, but I'm like, if you tell me that I had a diabetes or a heart, like it would make sense, because of my weight, because of, family factors, those things would make sense to me. But telling me that I had cancer, cervical cancer, it just didn't make sense to me. But then I learned about HPV, and then that opened a whole other Pandora's box. I remember the first time I found out about HPV. I had seen so many doctors, and not one doctor had mentioned HPV, but there was this one doctor, and he said, "You're so young, I'm gonna test you for HIV." And I was like, what? And he was just like, yeah, because cervical cancer is sexually transmitted. And I thought, what? And I remember just being out of sorts, like thinking like, what's happening? And that was my introduction to HPV, when that doctor that I went to, who came highly recommended, and he literally, I was just, again, a scared 25-year-old walking behind him, and he was rattling all of these things off. And that was one of the things he said, and that was my introduction to HPV being connected to cervical cancer. My gynecologic oncologist, who was amazing, he did discuss what it meant to have a radical hysterectomy. And I will say that he did everything he could to try to preserve my fertility. He not only did a right ovarian transpositioning, I remember he was like, we could take some of your ovarian tissue and freeze it. And, I look at the science now and you see that people are becoming parents from ovarian tissue that had been harvested. But in 2001, I was scared. I didn't have a lot of time. It was, if we're going to do it, you have to make this decision. It's going to cost all this money. We don't know if it can work. I mean, even just egg freezing, they're like, we can freeze eggs, but at the time they really didn't have the technology to thaw them successfully. And they were like, it's better if you freeze an embryo. That also meant that I would have to find someone to donate sperm or use donor sperm from a bank. And there was a cost with that. And it was just very overwhelming. My insurance denied, even my doctor who appealed on my behalf. We appealed to not only our insurance, but also the state, Maryland, that I was living in. It was denied. And it was just a lot to process in a very short period of time. And it was very overwhelming. And I remember my mom said to me, she said, "I'm sorry this is happening, but you just have to save your life." And that's what I did. And in order to save my life, I had to lose my fertility. After my radical hysterectomy, and I healed from that, and it's interesting when you say you heal from it, like you never heal from it. Like every day gets better, but you never fully heal from it. I had radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and you're basically burning your body from the inside out to rid your body of cancer. And while it's taking the cancer out, it's damaging the good organs, and it's leaving you forever changed. I was away from my family who was in South Carolina. I was living on my own, and it's funny, I am almost 50 and I'll be 48 this summer. And I remember at 25 thinking, God, I'm a grown up. I've got my own place. I got my own car. I'm paying my own bills. And I remember thinking like, this is hard. This is so hard. And I was so used to taking care of myself. And I think one of the hardest things was asking for help. Even though I had wonderful friends, wonderful support, probably the hardest thing for me was being so vulnerable, because it wasn't being vulnerable to my friends. It was being vulnerable to the cancer. It was saying the cancer had taken over so much that I couldn't do for myself. And that was on every level, like every level of my life. Like I was like, I need help. It's tough because my friends who were my age, like we never had anyone who had been through cancer. So they're supporting me, but they're also trying to do the same things. I remember I was going through chemo. And so for them, it was just like, oh, well, now she's just going to the hospital every blue moon or whatever. And then treatment was done. And they were like, oh, well, let's go to the mall. And I'm a former shopaholic. And so I remember this one occasion, we still laugh about this sometimes. My friends came up, some from Georgia, some from South Carolina. They came up to visit me and they're like, let's go to the mall. And that's our thing, right? We go and we shop till we drop. And I couldn't shop till I dropped. Like I had to sit down. And I mean, I remember them being kind of annoyed, like, we came all the way up here and you're just sitting over there. And they were really being insensitive. And now that we're all older and we've all been through life experiences, they understand that now. They were being little shits, but they didn't know it at the time. But it was really hard because I couldn't function like I normally would. On my job, if someone called me in and they wanted me to cover this or do that, I was like, yeah, go. You want me to go on a plane and go to New Hampshire and cover the primary? Sure, I'll go. I couldn't do those things anymore. So then I thought, like, I fought to get to the place I am in my career. And, it's a big place, but it's also a small place. And once you're out, you're out. And I didn't have that in me to fight for that anymore. And I also honestly didn't care about those types of stories that I was covering anymore. Everything, it's weird. Like I was still me, but I also had changed, right? I was forever changed. And I've learned that cancer comes in and it changes you. And so for me, I just wanted to go back to my life. I was like, I want to be delivered from this cancer. I want to go back to my life. I never want to think about cervical cancer again. And again, foolishly, I thought like, oh, I survived it. I'll put it behind me. And it's all I thought about, because then I was like, why isn't anyone talking about this? Because by now it's 2003. We've got an FDA approved test for, HPV. 2006, there's a vaccine. And I'm like, why aren't people talking about this? And we should be talking about breast cancer because it's super important, but we also have other cancers that we need to talk about. And so I got pissed that no one was talking about it, but yet the doctors kept telling me, we see this all the time. I'm like, where's my ribbon? What color is my ribbon? Where's my support group? Where's my 5K? And I was just livid. Before, I don't even know that I knew what happened when you got a pap test. I just, like, as a woman, it's just one of those things that you have to do. That literally was my mindset. Like, it's just one of those annoying things that you have to do. And honestly, there are two issues why I wasn't getting screened, right? So one was because as a freelancer that I didn't get insurance all the time. But the other reason was when I moved up here and I had to go see a doctor, she fat shamed me. I had my feet in the stirrups. She was pressing on my stomach and she said, if you were pregnant, you would never know. And I said, what? And I got out of there. I was like, I'll reschedule and come back. She's like, no, I'm sorry. And I was like, no, I'll reschedule and I'll come back. And I'm not saying this is why I got cervical cancer at all, but we have to change that culture, right? I was just talking to someone recently who was having fertility issues, and the person was just like, oh, well, you're obese, so you're going to have issues. And I was like, no, they need a longer speculum, or they need to have you scoot down more. There are things they can do. So people really need to work on their bedside manners, right? And so for me, that was another reason, because I was ashamed, and I'm not someone who's necessarily ashamed of my weight like everyone else. I want to make improvements, but that really, like, it's already so uncomfortable to experience a pap smear, but we have to do it, right? It's something that you have to do. So when that doctor said that to me, I was just like, no, like, now you're talking to me like that, and no. And I left. And so it's not like I was in a hurry to go back, right? And so it was partly because I didn't have insurance, but it was also because I was treated so poorly the last time I saw someone. There is nothing fun about cervical cancer screenings, but having cervical cancer is so much harder. It is so intrusive. If you think going in for a pap test or an HPV test is uncomfortable, think about 5 days a week having someone inside of your vagina, looking at your cervix, looking at your vaginal vault, the walls, once your cervix is removed. Think about having radioactive rods being inserted inside of your vagina. And I'm not saying this for shock value. I'm saying this because that is the reality. I know that that is why a lot of people think like, oh, that only happens to a certain type of person, or I don't need that. But I'm here to tell you having cancer is much worse. Also, people don't think you can die from cervical cancer. Most people assume that you have a hysterectomy or you have some cells removed. You have a LEAP procedure. You get some cells lasered off or scraped off and that's it. But the truth of the matter that even in the United States, globally is a whole nother level. But even in the United States, too many people die of cervical cancer. And so it's an absolute must, and I get it. It's uncomfortable. I don't like doing it. So I was really learning about HPV. You know, I had become like obsessed with it. I was focused on learning everything I could about HPV and its connection to cervical cancer. And by the time the vaccine was FDA approved, I remember I was just working back, right? Like I was full time, and one of the first assignments I got, we were going to cover this mandate in DC about this vaccine. And so I get the call sheet, all this other stuff, and we were in the car, and I remember my videographer, he was like, don't get us fired, because it was about the HPV vaccine. And so I go to my executive director, and I said, you know, I'm covering this, but you know how I personally feel about this. And he said, be a professional. That was his words to me, be a professional. So off we go. And I'm sitting in the back with all the other, you know, producers and reporters and, you know, videographers. And the person who's the council chair is getting up and giving her spiel. And she's just like, I don't even know why we're here today. We're not going to test this vaccine on our DC youth and da-da-da-da-da. And so we're supposed to also get interviews. So once the council hearing is over, we go after, and the videographer is behind me, and he's like, literally like, don't get us fired, Tamika, don't get us fired. So I was like, Councilwoman, I need to talk to you. And he's like, please don't get us fired. And I was like, I'm not gonna get us fired, but I have to ask her this question. And I said, why are you so against this? I said, isn't this great? I said, for decades, people have been looking for a cure for cancer. While this isn't a cure for cancer, it essentially will eliminate a cancer. And she said, because it just came out and it hasn't been researched or tested enough. I said, okay, fair enough, but how about this? I said, I had cervical cancer at 25 years old. I said, I'm 26 right now. And she said, well, you look like you're doing well. And I was like, are you kidding me? You can't see. You can't look at someone and tell they had cervical cancer, right? And she said, well, you look like you're doing fine. So why don't we just let young women decide for themselves when they're 18? And I thought, wow. So that was very eye-opening for me. Here is someone who's in charge of the health of Washington, D.C., of the residents of Washington, D.C., and she doesn't even want to hold a discussion because of the age. And in the world, but really in the United States, but in the world too, we have an issue with talking about sexual education, sexual health. We have an issue around information sharing and really understanding why the vaccine has to be started so young. And it's just really sad. It's really sad, but it was one of those eye-opening, moments for me of why this work matters. And she didn't get it. She didn't get that it was about preventing it, right, before it even happens. She didn't get it. And that's what the vaccine is about. It's about preventing it before it even happens. we can eliminate cervical cancer if everyone is all in. If everyone is all in and doing what they're supposed to do, we can do it. But if we still have so many people who are opposed to the HPV vaccine, no, we can't. We'll never get to zero. We won't. But if we have people who are all in and they trust the science, we can do it. We have a vaccine that prevents the virus that causes several different cancers, but yet people are terrified to take it. I think most people want to do what's best for their children. And I think the way that this vaccine was rolled out really damaged the perception of what the general public thinks of it. And there's been damage control trying to be done by everyone, by the makers of the vaccine, by medical centers, government officials, health ministries. It has been a horrific rollout. We've seen in places like Japan, where the anti-vaxxers have just made it impossible for people to get vaccinated, and they're just crawling out of that. We've seen here in the United States where people are just like, no. I remember my stepdaughter when she came to live with my husband and I, and we had to take her out of school in Washington, D.C. and put her in school in Maryland. I remember the headmaster passing a note to us and saying, just sign this. And I'm like, what is this? And my husband flipped it over. And my husband and my stepdaughter at the same time like, oh, she's not going to sign it. And they knew I was going to get on my soapbox because I was like, why are you passing this and not asking us about it? And it was basically an opt-out of the HPV vaccine, that we had to prove that Zakiya had been opted out of it. And I said, but what if we don't want to opt out? And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, most parents just opt out. I remember a pediatrician, when we went to get a pediatrician for her, one of the first things the pediatrician said, you don't need that right now. Why not? She's within the age range. And I remember the pediatrician was like, who are you? What do you do for a living? But and that's the thing that bugs me. And pediatricians, do not take this personal, because if you're doing what you're supposed to do, great. You are the doctor. Do your job and inform the parents. Parents, listen to the pediatrician, and yes, you have a right to do what you want to do, but pediatricians are there for a reason. And so I get it, though. Everyone is scared of upsetting the anti-vaxxers. But now we have people who are diagnosed with cervical cancer or other HPV-related cancers, and unfortunately, if they're lucky enough not to succumb to their cancer, they're living with terrible side effects, secondary issues from it. And so it has to change. As I was recovering, I think you kind of sit with, you're shell shocked. Like, did that just happen to me? You're at home and you go from going in, if you're doing treatment, going in every day, and then maybe going in once a week, and then you graduate to once a month, and 3 months, and 6 months, and a year. And then, there's the 5-year cancerversary that everyone looks forward to, and all the years matter, all the milestones. But you kind of just, I think you're like, wait, what happened? Because it's all a blur, right? You're diagnosed, you've got to hurry up and make decisions, how you're going to be treated. It's all this. And then one day, if you're lucky, you're net, no evidence of disease, and you get to go on with your life. And I just thought, easy. I'm going to pick up right where cancer came in. And I couldn't do it. Because outwardly you may be healed, but inside your body, chemo and radiation, even healing from the surgery, it all takes time. It takes time, and you're clawing to get back to the old you. But the old you, I liken it to puzzle pieces. If you like puzzles and you play puzzles and you put them together multiple times, the pieces get worn a little bit. So there are times where you can pick up the puzzle and all the pieces will stick together. But there are times when the puzzle pieces are worn and you pick them up and then I'm like a puzzle piece. I don't fit the same way that I used to. And so for me, it was like, okay, this is what I'm working with now, and it was hard. I'm not going to say that it was overnight. But when I created my organization, I did it for a very selfish reason, because I didn't want to be. I couldn't be the only one. And People from around the world always thank me for creating this organization, but I need to thank them because they're the ones who have truly changed my life. They give me a reason to wake up every single day, because some of them don't survive cervical cancer. And I could have easily been one of those people who didn't survive it. But I survived, and I wake up every day with them on my mind. And I think about Holly. I think about Jillian. I think about Tialita. I think about Becky. I think about every single one of them. I think about Curtissa, who was so scared to leave her son. And I get to wake up every single day and live my life. And I made a promise, and my promise is that I'm going to make cancer pay every single day. Afterwards, all my friends were in shock. And so they kept asking, like, what happened to you? And so it was like retelling the story over and over again. And then they were asking, what can we do? And so I was just like, I'm pretty smart. I know we have a cervix. I know it has a function. I was like, but let me now become well-versed in this, right? So it's like getting all these books about the female anatomy, your flower, and understanding it all. I literally have this stack of books that I got from the store, from the bookstore. And it was, wow, there are a lot of us walking around who are really educated. Like there was this woman who's an MIT graduate, and I remember I did this thing like, where's your cervix? And she was like, here. And I was like, no, that's your stomach, And I knew what she was doing, but for me, it was like, we need to be educated. We need to learn not only about our bodies, but be empowered, right? To be empowered about doing the best for our bodies, to do the things that we need to be, to understand what screenings are available. But also, we hear so much about breast cancer that there isn't something that is pushing, well, let's talk about below the belt cancers, or let's talk about the other things. We should talk about whole health, right? So it's not just about one disease site. I know if someone would have told me more about HPV and cervical cancer, and I was more educated about it and understanding why we needed to go get a pap smear, that might have been a change for me. I mean, the reality is this is my story, right? So I can't turn left, I can't turn right, I can't go back. This is the hand that I was dealt, right? So the only way I can go is move forward, but also educate others who are coming behind me so it doesn't happen to them. And that's how I choose to look at it. And so for the longest time, I just felt like, why weren't you going in when you were supposed to go in to get screened? And I was shaming, blaming, doing all those other things. But that, I can't change the past. All I can do now is do better in the future. And so that means, like, right now, I need to schedule my mammogram. So I have a note in my phone right now, like, schedule your mammogram. Like, you have to schedule your mammogram. I want to go see another primary care physician. I need to look at it, and I need to make it a priority. We put those things off, but you can't put your health off. So my friends were asking, like, what can we do? What can we do? And I don't know what we can do. And, as I was healing, and they would come over and they would visit me and bring, I'm very social. I like to throw dinner parties, have cocktails and conversations and all these other things. And so during this time, Sex and the City was like at the huge part of its thing, right? Like in its heyday. And my friends would come over, we would watch Sex and the City, and they would come over to cheer me up. And I remember I was in this dark place, and I was like, no one's gonna wanna marry me because I can't have kids. And I wasn't even looking to get married at the time, but these were the things that I was thinking about now. Like, if I go on a date, do I need to say like, hey, I can't have cancer? Like, all these things are running through my head. So when my friends were coming over, they were like, we're not gonna talk about cancer. We're gonna bring over food. We're gonna watch Sex and the City. We're gonna play games, because I love to play games. So like, I am a maniac when it comes to like Uno and Taboo and Pictionary and things like, and I wanna win. I don't wanna lose. And we do karaoke. And so what would happen is we would have fun and we would be doing all these things. And then all of a sudden the conversation would turn to my cancer, even though they promised that it wouldn't. But they would say, now what happened to you again? What happened to you? And then we would have this conversation, because we're all young women, and they're like, what happened and how? And so I'm becoming this expert about cervical cancer and HPV because I'm learning and I want to tell them. And then this domino effect is happening. They're telling other people and they're like, well, my friend, she got these abnormal cells and I think it's like pre-cancer and she wants to talk to you. So now I didn't know it at the time, but I'm doing peer-to-peer counseling and I'm supporting these people who are friends of friends of friends of friends. And the next thing I know, we're having support groups. But I didn't want to have just any type of support group. It's like, let's come over and play Taboo, let's play Pictionary, but I changed it and called it Sectionary. And let's kind of talk about, the parts of the female anatomy and what we need to know. And before I knew it, our HPV parties were born, and that was our house parties of 5, right? And so the organization at the time was called Tamika and Friends because it was me and my friends having these house parties. For me, it was fun. It was like, okay, we'll go to each other's house and every time we'll invite a few people over and we'll play these party games. And while we're playing these party games, we'll educate about cervical cancer and it's edutainment. And so that really is the origin story of how it started. And then fast forward with the introduction of the HPV test and Gardasil and Cervarix and HPV vaccines in 2006. And then myself being more involved with like the President's Cancer Panel, guideline panels and other boards and advocacy groups. And while I'm sitting there, I remember one day someone was giving a presentation, a researcher, and they were giving the statistics for women in the United States who had had cervical cancer in 2001. And I said, oh, I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that statistic. And with my producer hat on, I was thinking, like, we have a marketing problem here. We've got all this great data, but we don't have patients telling the story. And I thought, I'll get patients together. I'm a storyteller. I'm a great storyteller. I'm Southern, so I'm a storyteller just naturally, but I'm also a professionally trained storyteller because I'm a TV producer. I will bring people together and have them tell their story. So I put out the beacon call, like, come, let's get together. And I barely got 6 people. That included me, because who wants to talk about this? And I remember feeling so just like this is never gonna work. And I laugh about it now because I look at our website. And if you ask me how many stories on there, I can't tell you. There's so many stories. There's so many people in our private groups who are sharing, which is sad because that means more people are being diagnosed with cervical cancer, but it's good because they're able to find us. I mean, people from around the world, from places that I've never heard of, like people come and they talk to us. And so what I realized is that not only is it about support and spreading awareness. So one part of Survivor is about the support. We never want anyone to feel like they're alone. But the other part of Survivor is about making your survivorship count. You've had this happen to you. What do you want to do with it? So becoming a patient advocate. And not everyone will want to do that. But for those who want to take that next step and make their survivorship count, to make cancer pay, we have our Survivor School. And we train them how to be patient advocates. We have cervical cancer summits. We have groups for different ethnicities. We also have Survivor Africa. We have Survivor API. We have Survivor Noir. We have so many different things. Survivor Espanol. I know I'm forgetting some right now, but it really has taken off. And what Survivor is, it's for me, and I didn't always feel this way, but I know this now looking in retrospect. I became a survivor the day that I was diagnosed. And survivor, spelled CERVIVOR, I want people to know that you are a survivor, that you are informed, you are empowered, and most of all, you are alive. And if it comes to it, we'll hold your hand even on the last day. And I've been able to do that for several of our survivor members. Something that I never thought that I would be able to do, but I've been able to hold their hands on their deathbeds. They've been able to tell me what Survivor has meant to them, but also what they want me and the organization to do moving forward. And I made promises to women that I have to carry out. So for me, Survivor it's hard telling this story now because I have an actual baby, but you know, if you would have asked me before November 21st, 2022, Survivor is my baby. And it'll always be my first baby. Survivor it gave me something to do when I felt hopeless. It gave me just a light in the distance, something to look forward to. And it came really from my frustration of hearing, we see this all the time. It came from my frustration of not having a ribbon, not knowing the color. It came from my frustration of one of the only websites I could find at the time. The personal stories had silhouettes of the people. So it's like you can't even show a real face because we're supposed to be so ashamed. But it also came from wanting to make sense of this horrific thing that had happened to me and not understanding how it could happen to me because I was so safe. I did all the things that I was supposed to do. So how could this happen to me? And that I would have to wear, a quote unquote scarlet letter if I started sharing my story. And so when people don't want to share their story, I understand it. Who would want to talk about this and say that this has happened to them? But as a journalist, I know that stories are powerful. I know that stories can shape the narrative. I know that we can save lives, we can spread awareness. And what I learned from all of this prior to now having my son is that the lives that I save is my legacy. That my legacy won't be the lives that I bring into this world, but my legacy is going to be the lives that I save. And I believe that every single person who lives, they leave a little bit of them behind. And so Survivor truly is a little piece of me that I want to leave behind. And I hope one day that we don't need it because we can end cervical cancer. I don't think I ever closed the door on becoming a mom. And it's like, I've birthed things, right? I birthed an organization, Survivor. So I think I told myself a story that I just accepted that was enough. That birthing this organization, giving it everything I had was enough. That I had survived cervical cancer, so that was enough. I had become a stepmom, so that was enough. I didn't deserve to ask or be given anything more. And I remember thinking, like, there's so-and-so, they don't have any kids, and there's fine. There's so-and-so, they don't have kids, their life is fine. And I had a good life post-cancer, right? My life was good, and it was amazing, and it was wonderful, and I was just doing just fine. But I'd be lying if I didn't ever think about what it would be like to have a baby. And I remember saying, like, if I become a mom, it's because someone's going to leave a baby on my doorstep. And so while someone didn't leave a baby in my doorstep, the way that I became a mom fell into my lap. At least that's how I look at it. So during the pandemic, this woman came into our organization, like many people, because she was diagnosed with cervical cancer and she was looking for some place to come and talk and, get real about this and find out information and all those things. And she and her husband were also beginning the surrogacy path to become parents. And that path led them to having twin boys in March of 2020. And I remember when she posted, and she and I were friendly, right? And I remember when she posted on social media, and we were all waiting, right? Because, it's exciting that, bittersweet, but it's exciting. And I remember when she posted that the boys are here and, their weight, how long they were, all this stuff. And I remember being so happy for her and her husband. But I also remember feeling this sadness, and it didn't last long. It was very fleeting. But she was just like, I can't wait for you to experience this. It's so amazing. And I was like, this is awkward, but maybe she's just so high on what had just happened, And then she sends me a message and she said, you and I should talk soon. I've got something fun I want to chat with you about. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, oh, she wants to maybe set up a scholarship for surrogacy, or maybe she wants to hold an informational chat to educate more people about it. And so on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2020, she called me. And, I don't even think either of one of us acknowledged that that was the date at the time. But the call happened on April 1st, April Fool's Day, and she called me, and you could just hear the excitement in her voice. You could tell she was tired. Obviously she's got newborn twins. And she starts talking about everything that I've meant to her and Survivor has meant to her, and how she loves seeing my husband and I on social media, and what a lovely couple we are, and all this other stuff. And again, I'm not thinking of it. Honestly, we're having this talk and I'm doing like little things, piddling around the house. I'm engaged and I'm listening, but I'm also doing different things. And she was just like, I hate that you didn't get to experience this. I hate the way that part of your story happened. And I was like, I hate it too. And she said, our family is wonderful and it's complete. And we have remaining embryos, and my husband and I, we want to donate the remaining embryos to you and your husband. And I was like, what? Like, say that again? And I always have something to say, and I couldn't speak. I was completely blown away by that. Just the most generous, most thoughtful, most beautiful gift. She's ruined gift giving for every single person in my life. No one will ever be able to top this gift. And so I was so overcome with emotion. I actually apologized and told her I had to get off the phone. And so then we texted a little later, and she was like, I just realized it's April Fool's Day. I want you to know, like, this is not an April Fool's joke. I was like, I didn't think it was. But she was like, you deserve to experience motherhood. And then I thought, but I'm too old now. I'm 46. And then I thought, like, my stepdaughter just went to college and we're empty nesters now. And then I thought, how are we going to afford it? And then I thought, I'm too old and I won't have much time with him. And then I thought, why not? And it was because I was scared. I was scared on so many levels, I think. And I was also scared that what if the cancer comes back and finishes what it started, and now I have this sweet baby. Like, I can't do that to him. And every single time I was like, I can't do it. We can't afford it. It's not going to happen. And God made a way. And it happened. And now I have this amazing, everybody says this, but he really is. If you meet him, he's amazing. This amazing baby boy, Chayton, and he is our survivor baby. I share him with the entire community. He literally has aunties around the world. And I recognize that this will not happen for everyone, but he is so loved. I love his, Tia Carla. She's from Honduras. I love, his auntie Millicent and Sally, who live in Kenya, Africa. I love, his auntie Kimberly, who lives in Texas, who she proclaims herself the favorite auntie, his auntie Patty, who's in New York. And, of course, Jenny, who without him, I wouldn't be a mom. And so while I created this organization for so many reasons, without cervical cancer and without this organization, I wouldn't have Chayton. And so I'm not thankful to cancer for that, but it's a full circle moment of my journey with cervical cancer.